Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Stuart Nash.
Thank you much, Mr. Speaker. I'm not too sure what that member was talking about, but let me add a little bit of clarity to the debate here. I know. Well, look, the purpose of this bill is actually to promote effective export marketing of horticultural commodities. That's something we all want. But, Mr. Speaker, we must understand in the 21st century, it's countries, not just companies, that are seeking to develop a global competitive advantage in this day and age. Gone are the days where we can go overseas and talk and hand out a whole lot of rugby jerseys and expect to do business. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned in a speech earlier on this evening, one of the things that I think that government has done incredibly poorly is manage our global brand. Now, what is a global brand worth, Mr. Speaker? Well, in 2005, the then Ministry of Economic Development valued New Zealand's global brand, the clean, green, 100% pure brand, at $20 billion a year. At the same time, Deloitte did a survey and found that 80% of New Zealand companies that sought to export leveraged off this clean, green brand. And yet, Mr. Speaker, I think it was Amy Adams that talked about rivers, that it was acceptable if they were a good enough quality to go wading in. Mr. Speaker, one thing that I think I agree with Barbara Krug, I think what she was trying to say is the story we tell overseas about our brand, the clean, green, 100% pure, if we don't actually live that brand, if we don't walk the walk, then what happens is it becomes a fallacy. And what happens ultimately, Mr. Speaker, is we become just another small economy pushing commodities into an increasingly competitive global market. Mr. Speaker, we need a global competitive advantage that stands for something. When someone buys a kiwi fruit or an apple or a banana or a nashi in a supermarket and it has New Zealand on it, they need to know that stands for freshness, for great systems, for organic or whatever, but it's got to stand for something more than the same product from Australia or South America or somewhere else. And if we don't manage this brand well, Mr. Speaker, we are in huge trouble. And what I would really like to see is the environmental policy from that government over the next 8 months, because that's all they've got, actually start to reflect the value of this brand in a way that is walking the walk, because if it becomes a myth, we're in trouble. Now, Mr. Speaker, when we talk about horticultural exports, what actually are we talking about? Is this a big industry or is this a small industry? Well, it did increase by 9.5% in 2016, horticultural exports, to a record $4.3 billion. Kiwi fruit in 2015 exports increased by $251 million to $1.2 billion. And they're on target to meet their 2025 target of $3 billion. Apples, they're up by $25 million to $562 million, and they're on track to meet their target of $1 billion of exports by 2020. In fact, Mr. Speaker, let's put this into perspective and see how valuable this industry has become to this country. In terms of the total horticultural exports, in 1985, they were worth $481 million, or 4.4% of New Zealand's merchandise exports. By 2005, that had grown to $2.3 billion, or 7.5% of New Zealand's merchandise exports. Move forward to 2015, and we're now talking about nearly $4.5 billion, or 8.8% of New Zealand's exports, and it's only going to get better. I know in Hawke's Bay, which has the second largest area under horticulture behind Marlborough, and significantly more than most regions, there are literally millions of dollars being put into planting more orchards. This is a significant industry, and we need to get this right. Mr. Speaker, the export values of products greater than 10 million are kiwi fruit, wine, apples, cherries, avocados, the things we don't necessarily think about. Asia, for example, we sent $1.43 billion of horticultural exports to Asia in 2015, $826 million to Australia, $642 million to North America, continental Europe, $632 million into the UK, over $500 million of exports. Absolutely, Mr.
Yeah,
Speaker.
we're halfway through. You haven't done that yet.
Yep, well, we're talking about the horticultural exports here, Mr. Speaker.
Yep, so
and
tell us
the
what it
point
does.
I'm making, if we are to get this right, if we're really to grow the premium brand, the brand New Zealand, then exporting our horticultural products is just so important. And this bill is a small step. It's not a panacea. We should be doing more. There's no doubt about that. I completely agree with the Greens on terms of country and label origin. And why wouldn't we be doing it? We have absolutely nothing to lose by doing this. We have nothing to lose by doing this. Let's get brand New Zealand out there. When you go to the supermarket, I want to know where I'm buying my food from. I want to know if I'm buying Kiwi or buying wherever. Why shouldn't we do this? Why shouldn't we know this? But also, why shouldn't we expect our export markets to do exactly the same? If we get this right, Mr. Speaker, the value of horticultural exports will go through the roof. A zestberry, for me, is a classic case of how to decommoditise something that was a commodity. And they have done a brilliant job of really creating a differential in the marketplace around quality, around different products, actually. Fonterra, they could be doing better, but brand Fonterra means something. This is what we need to do in the horticultural sector as well, Mr. Speaker. And time again in primary industries, whether it be meat or wool or wood, we go overseas and we compete against each other. How does that help us in the 21st century? Quite simply, it doesn't at all, Mr. Speaker. So I'm in favour of this bill, but actually I would like to see a whole lot more done to really drive value, to get that brand New Zealand up there, but not only brand New Zealand in the global markets, to have brand New Zealand mean something in New Zealand. Because, Mr. Speaker, probably like you, I grew up swimming in clean rivers and fresh lakes. Our kids aren't doing that at the moment. We need to get back to that, because that is what, I'm sorry if I'm keeping you up, Mr. McKelvey, but that is what brand New Zealand means to Kiwis, but it also must be what brand New Zealand means to our global markets. Because if we can't get that premium, we're in trouble. Conversely, if we can get that premium around what New Zealand is worth, then these exports will go through the roof. So I do support this bill, but I think there's a lot more we could be doing. Thank you very much.